Hi, this is Mr. Nazarian. Our lesson objective today: I can solve a real-world word problem using division with a remainder and logically decide what to do with the remainder. 5th grade standard, numbers base 10, B6. Marley decided she wanted to be a teacher when she grew up. Yay! So she worked hard, and that's exactly what she became. She planned a school-wide field trip to go to the Portland Art Museum for all of her school's students in grades kindergarten through 5th. Her school had 370 students and 15 teachers. She needed to schedule buses to transport the students to the museum. Each bus could take 80 passengers. How many buses does Miss Marley need to request? All right, what is the first thing that we need to do when addressing a word problem? How are we going to go about tackling this problem? What's the first thing we need to do? Okay, that's right. The first thing that we need to do is, hold on 1 second here. The first thing that we need to do is look at the question. So, the question is, how many buses does Miss Marley need to request? And this is so important that we look at the question first, because that's going to help us decide what the important information is, so we don't ever start working with numbers that aren't necessary in solving the problem. So, in order to find out how many buses Miss Marley needs to request, as we look through this, we need to know how many passengers there are, and we need to know how many passengers can fit on one bus. So, do a different color here. Let's do blue. So, for the amount of passengers that can go on one bus, it's right here. It says each bus can take 80 passengers, so that's very important to figure out how many buses she needs. And then how many passengers? Now, it says her school had 370 students and 15 teachers. Should we include the students and the teachers in this if we want to take the field trip? I know it'd probably be more fun for the students to not bring the teachers, but I think we're going to have to bring them anyway. So that means that we're going to have to include that 370 and also the 15 teachers. So that means that what kind of math are we going to have to do here for the to find out how many passengers there are? We're going to have to add. So we're going to have 370 students plus the 15 teachers. We'll have a total of 385, right? So then we'll know how many passengers fit in each bus. So then what kind of math do you think we're going to need to solve this problem? Once we have the total amount of passengers and the amount of passengers that fits on one bus, which kind of math, what operation should we use? Okay, so let's say that always in this we want to use reasoning. We always think what's reasonable, what makes sense. So even before we do any number crunching, we can just think, well, I mean, I don't know, maybe multiplication, maybe it's multiplying those numbers. We can look at this and say, well, let's see, what numbers are we working with? We're working with 385 and 80. If I multiply those numbers together, I'm going to get a number in the thousands, right? So then I look at go back to the question, how many buses does Miss Marley need? Is it reasonable that she would request thousands of buses to get these 385 passengers there? That doesn't make any sense, right? You'd have many buses that would be empty going there, even if you put just one person on each bus. So that's not reasonable. We're going to be taking the entire amount of, we're going to be taking the entire school's students and teachers, all of these passengers, and then dividing them up into 80 passengers into this bus, 80 passengers in that bus. So we are going to be using division. So we take the information that we've been given. We know that we have 370 students. We have 15 teachers. We are going to add them up, and we'll have 385 passengers. We know there's 80 passengers per bus, and so we're going to do division to figure out how many. Remember, this is like our total amount here. There's our division. This is a total amount of people. We take out 80 people, put them in a bus, take out another 80 people, put them in a bus. How many buses are we going to need until we can get all those people to the museum. So using multiples to solve this problem, I'm going to think, well, okay, how many times? Well, I could do minus 80, minus 80, minus 80, right? Or I could use multiples to get there faster. So I know that 80 and 80 plus 80 is going to give me 160, right? That would be the second multiple, so that'd be 80 doubled. And I know that 160 doubled would be 320. So that means that the fourth multiple would be 320, right? Because the fourth multiple is twice as much as the second multiple, which I know is 160. So I have 320. I'm going to find the difference, and the difference is 65. So from our work today and from the lesson last night, we know that once the difference here, as I'm taking out groups, is less than the divisor, that means it's a remainder. So if that is the case, then the answer should be 4 to this division problem should be 4 with a remainder of 65. But here's the part that we need to remember. So if this was just numbers and we had no understanding of what these numbers represented or symbolized, 4 with a remainder of 65 would be a perfectly reasonable answer. However, again, we're going to go back to that question because that's the most important part of this problem. How many buses does Miss Marley need to request? So imagine she's calling the transportation department. Is she going to say, I'm going to need 4 buses and a remainder of 65? The bus transportation people are going to look at her like she's crazy, right? You can't get 4 buses and a remainder of 65. So we need to think about what is it that these numbers represent. Remember, this number here represents the number of total passengers, students and teachers that are going on the field trip. The divisor here tells us how many passengers can go on each bus. And this 4 tells us, remember this fourth multiple of 80, tells us that 1 bus is 80 people. 4 buses would be 320 people. Those are passengers. So this difference here is how many passengers would be left over if there were only 4 buses. Now, what this is going to look like, and a lot of times illustrating helps us when we're dealing with word problems, is that there's 1, 2, 3, 4 buses. Remember, there's 80 people, passengers in each bus. So this is this part up here of the quotient. The remainder of 65 means there's 65 people that are just sitting on the sidewalk waiting to say, no, don't leave us behind. And we can't do that, right? So we need to think about, well, what can we do to get all the passengers to the museum on that field trip? And what we're going to have to do, what's the reasonable thing to do here? The reasonable thing to do is to get 1 more bus. And that bus is going to have 65 passengers on it. So even though the answer to this division problem is 4 with a remainder of 65, using it logically with reason as far as the context of this word problem, how many buses she needs, she can't just get 4, because if she just gets 4, there's going to be a whole bunch of sad, disappointed people left behind. She needs to order 5 buses to get all 385 passengers on the trip. Okay, so that's the kind of work we're going to be doing tomorrow. Look forward to working with you tomorrow. See you then.